TD. Jakes just gave his daughter, who became a teen mother at the age of 14, control over America's largest church. But people aren't discussing for that reason. Jake's name was revealed in court records by a producer who was suing Diddy. Then an accused man from the 1980s came forward. Jakes responded by filing a lawsuit of his own. Something more significant is taking place in the Potter's mansion between the billion-dollar agreements and the near-death experience on live television. Furthermore, the true narrative is only now beginning to emerge. On June 9, 1957, Thomas Dexter Jakes was born in South Charleston, West Virginia. Ernest Jakes Sr., his father, operated a little janitorial company. Odette, his mother, was a teacher. Despite their hard labor, life was never simple. Out of the 3 children, Thomas was the youngest. They lived in a low-income black area where bigotry and hardship were commonplace. The finances were tight. There were little opportunities. However, something strong was developing under that pressure. His parents instilled in him the values of perseverance, hard effort, and self-belief. Everything he became thereafter would be shaped by that worldview. Thomas's lisp was so severe as a youngster that most people believed he would never be a preacher. However, that was precisely what he desired. He would preach to trees in his lawn and plush animals in his bedroom. He was only a child. The fire, however, was already present. A few of his classmates made fun of him. A few grown-ups gave an eye roll. But he continued. They began referring to him as Bible Boy. He was indifferent. He practiced every single day. He practiced his speech constantly and mimicked the sermons he heard at church. He was not content to merely converse. He desired to influence others. His armor was that early passion. Then everything was different. His father suffered from kidney failure, the kind that gradually robs you, when Thomas was 10 years old. Treatment was scarce in those days, particularly for West Virginia's black families. His dad became weaker. His mother and Thomas took over the role of his caregivers. He had no other option, yet it was more than a youngster should bear. He needed to mature quickly. Despite missing school, taking care of his siblings, and doing the housework, he never voiced any complaints. He was forever changed by witnessing his father's suffering. It showed him the value of family love and how fleeting life can be. The pain worsened after 3 years. Thomas's father passed away in 1973 while he was only 16 years old. The family was inconsolable. Everything fell apart, both financially and emotionally. In order to assist, Thomas had been working part-time at the Union Carbide plant, but he now needed to take on more. He worked at any job he could find, as did his brother. They were unsure of how they would eat on some days. However, Thomas continued to preach despite the gloom. Just his voice, his faith, and his fire, no money, few churches, and little crowds. He became a man before he was ready after losing his father, but it also helped him discover his purpose. Thomas delivered his first actual sermon in 1976, when he was just 19 years old. He was formally ordained in 1979. For a young man who had experienced so much, it was a significant step. Although the lisp persisted, it was no longer an issue. People paid attention. Because it seemed to them that he had lived out every word. He wasn't merely quoting the Bible. He was gushing blood. He preached anywhere he could at night while working ordinary jobs during the day. Although the groundwork had been established, his life did not yet appear to be a success tale. There was more to come. In 1981, that something began to take shape. In Beckley, West Virginia, Thomas received an invitation to speak at a church revival. He met Sarita N. Jameson there. Her birthday is August 19, 1955. She was intelligent, well-respected, and already involved in ministry. However, she had a painful background. In front of his kids, her brother had been killed. She has experienced violence in past relationships. Nevertheless, she came to hear Thomas's sermon. Something clicked that night. He drew her in. People stated they were smitten. They began to converse. Their marriage took place 6 months later. Quick, unfiltered, and authentic. It was destiny, not merely love. They had a difficult marriage. Not at all. At first, they had no money. While Thomas preached during the day, Sarita worked as a Christian radio DJ at night. Despite their lack of wealth, they were full of dreams. Then, after only 6 months, catastrophe struck. Sarita's feet and legs were crushed in an automobile accident. Doctors doubted she would ever be able to walk again. Thomas, however, would not allow her to quit up. Together, they painstakingly and gently relearned how to walk. Their marriage became unbreakable at that time. Sarita developed into more than just a wife over time. She joined the ministry as a partner, publishing her own books and directing women's groups. Jakes founded his first church in 1980 when he was barely 23 years old. Montgomery, West Virginia is home to the Temple of Faith Church. 10 people were involved. That's all. Just belief, no money, no fame. A storefront was rented by them. The winters were cold, and the summers were torrid. Bills were piling up. They occasionally gathered empty bottles solely to purchase food. However, the word continued to spread. From Montgomery to Smithers, then to Cross Lanes, South Charleston, and finally to Dallas, Texas. Because he persisted, what began with 10 individuals expanded into the Potter's House, more than 30,000 members, and one of the largest churches in America. Thomas continued to work while constructing that first church. At the Union Carbide chemical plant, he put in his time. Long hours, hazardous work, mining fumes, welding chemicals, and then straight to the pulpit. No stops or leisure, only hustling. The factory closed in 1982. Jakes was laid off. The situation worsened. For $100 a day, he dug ditches for his brother. Not always able to pay the expenses. They occasionally had to decide between electricity and water. One bill at a time, he and Sarita alternated. They used the family's bottles when there was no water. They utilized candles in the absence of light. However, the sermons continued. When T.D. Jakes took over a little church in Smithers, West Virginia, in 1982, he was only 25 years old. With barely 10 members, enough to occupy a single car, it was known as Greater Emmanuel Temple of Faith. That would have seemed like a dead end to most people. Jakes, however, noticed something else. He had nearly nothing with his wife, Sarita. Consequently, through writing, books, and prayer. To keep their lights on, she even worked late hours as a Christian radio DJ. But Jakes continued to preach with all his might. He was known as Bible Youngster as a youngster because he preached to made-up crowds. He was now delivering sermons to actual people, real souls in need of hope. Jakes ignored the poverty despite the fact that the church was located in a coal town that was struggling. He saw possibilities. He hosted his first church conference in 1983. The title was Back to the Bible. There were 80 persons. That was 8 times the church's original size. The first concrete indication that his message could go well beyond Smithers was this. Jakes made a bold attempt that same year. He started a new show called Back to the Bible and paid $45 for a 30-minute radio slot. It was a significant risk. His church was unable to pay for it. However, he thought that the airways had power. His voice began to spread to desolate houses, chilly towns, and locations where no preacher had yet visited. He immediately struck a chord with the audience. His statements were strong and empathetic. All of a sudden, hundreds of people were listening to the man who had previously spoken to just 10. Everything changed because of that tiny radio show. He became a local celebrity as a result. Every week, people waited to hear this voice. It also prepared the ground for the following step. Jakes realized in 1988 that he had to go beyond his storefront church. At that point, he became a member of Higher Ground Always Abounding Assemblies, a Pentecostal denomination. Bishop Sherman Watkins, who soon became Jakes' father figure and mentor, served as its leader. Watkins had only 11 employees at the beginning. Something about Jakes reminded him of his own path. Jakes gained more than just a title by joining this organization. It provided him with more resources, a larger audience, and more resounding support. Their message was precisely the same as his: ordinary people might serve an exceptional God. Jakes was no longer working alone thanks to this new relationship. He had a road towards something greater, a network, and a leader. Then the motion started. Jakes moved his church to South Charleston, West Virginia, in 1990 from Smithers. Although it was a smaller city, it was far bigger than the one he began in. The congregation erupted. Jakes did not advocate for superficial comfort, even if the crowd grew from about 100 to over 300. He addressed the forgotten, the addicted, and the hurting. By 1993, he took yet another risk. This time to change lanes in a middle-class area that is primarily white. A black Pentecostal pastor moving into such a place was unprecedented, but it was successful. Over 1,100 people joined his church, with 40% of them being white. That was uncommon, almost shocking, but it demonstrated that Jakes could transcend racial and social divides without diluting his message. Prior to these actions, Jakes had already made a significant move in 1987. He was ordained as a bishop at the age of 30. Officially, it was. He was touched by Dr. Quander L. Wilson at the Charleston Civic Center. In addition to giving him a new title, the ceremony also granted him respect, authority, and the capacity to lead more congregations. His perseverance and devotion had demonstrated his worth. The church now recognized it with authority and status. Everything altered once more in 1993. Using the Trinity Broadcasting Network, Jakes started a weekly television show. The Potter's Touch was the name of it. His sermons were no longer confined to a room. Millions of homes had it. His message started to spread throughout the nation and perhaps the world. He spoke in a straightforward, passionate, vivacious, and honest manner. To keep up with the expansion, he relocated to Dallas, Texas, only 3 years later. His show was broadcast in more than 100 countries by that point. This was no longer only a ministry. There was a movement. He took yet another calculated risk in 1994. In order to reach black audiences who hardly ever saw religious leaders like him on mainstream television, he teamed with Black Entertainment Television, or BET. He did more than merely preach. He customized them. Discussed topics such as everyday survival, fatherhood, healing, money, and dignity. Millions of people in the US, the Caribbean, Africa, and Europe received these messages. His voice instantly captured the attention of people who had never been inside a church. He established the Manpower Conference, a forum exclusively for men, in the same year. Detroit hosted the first one. There were thousands. It was vulnerable, honest, and unvarnished. Jakes reassured males that it was acceptable to experience pain, to cry, and to recover. The meeting continued to expand. In 2011, a Dallas event drew almost 9,000 guys. Since the start, more than 150,000 guys had arrived. A few arrived by plane from Italy. His voice carried that far. Jakes took another chance in 1995. TDJ Enterprises was founded by him. It was a vision, not just a company. Through it, he released music records, created movies, and published books. Woman, Thou Art Loosed, his debut feature picture, was a box office success in 2004. Next came Heaven is for Real in 2014, followed by Jumping the Broom in 2011. Over 20 million copies of his books have been sold globally. Black Enterprise claims that TDJ Enterprises generated close to $400 million in revenue. He was no longer merely a preacher. He was powerful, a producer, and a publisher. In Dallas, he even established a school and built a housing project worth $150 million. Jakes hosted a program called Get Ready from 1995 to 1996. It was broadcast on television and radio. It included live calls, music, interviews, and preaching. It was broadcast on BT, TBN, and syndicated. As a result, it was among the most widely viewed religious broadcasts. Millions of people watched. The subjects were authentic. Jakes never held back when it came to addiction, domestic abuse, financial difficulties, and broken homes. He was not merely a preacher. He spoke to those who were hurting. He gave hope. He provided them with motivation to continue. Few pastors have ever ventured to do what T.D. Jakes did in 1996. He relocated to Dallas, Texas, leaving behind his expanding congregation in a little hamlet in West Virginia. He wasn't by himself. 50 employees and their families accompanied him. It was more than a simple move. It was a mission. He erected the enormous Potter's House on a 34-acre hilltop. There were about 1,000 people in his previous church. However, he targeted tens of thousands in Dallas. The new facility had offices, space for expansion, and an auditorium with 5,000 seats. It also grew quickly. By 2000, they had constructed a brand new sanctuary that was 191,000 square feet in size, could accommodate 7,600 people, and was equipped with the newest technology. They only needed 4 years to pay it off. The momentum gathered speed like that. Something significant seemed to be happening even at the Potter's House's very first service. There were more than 2,000 attendees. They arrived in a brand new city and a brand new church. In just a few years, they were hosting 3 Sunday services. Over 23,000 individuals were attending each week by August 2000. What began as an act of faith had evolved into a phenomenon. The Potter's home not only expanded but also burst into flames. Over 30,000 members joined. It was named one of the largest churches in the nation by Outreach magazine. With more than 16,000 weekly attendees, CBS News ranked it as the 25th largest megachurch in America in 2018. Online viewership reached 70,000 for special events. It developed into a movement rather than merely a church. The people were what made it unique. The congregation was almost all male. An odd figure for a church, particularly one with a predominantly minority membership. However, that was the main objective. The Potter's House was not like the others. People from all walks of life came together because of it. The working class families, professionals, the homeless, and those who have served time in prison. Jakes explained. Everyone had a place. Tens of thousands of men started attending his manpower conferences. His message transcended gender, class, and color. Hurricane Katrina followed. Millions of people lost their houses and more than 1,800 individuals perished in 2005. Jakes wasn't just a spectator. Alongside President George W. Bush, he traveled to Louisiana. Bush officially acknowledged Jakes on September 5 for his assistance in organizing what he referred to as the Army of Compassion. Jakes called on the president to take a more direct approach to addressing poverty. He was now advising the White House in addition to preaching. Jakes was also there on January 20, 2009, when Barack Obama took the oath of office. At St. John's Episcopal Church, he participated in a private prayer with a select number of leaders that morning. The moment was silent but impactful. He prayed for the first black president in American history while standing next to Joel Hunter and other religious leaders. He was more than just a pastor that day. He represented the pinnacle of spiritual leadership. Jakes, however, did not end at the pulpit. The Metroplex Economic Development Corporation was established by him in 1998. It provided hope to underprivileged communities, mentored youth, and assisted families in purchasing homes. Additionally, he established the Clay Academy, which promoted education and community development. These weren't merely initiatives. For those who had been abandoned, they served as lifelines. Jakes felt that action should follow faith. Then came television. He started a syndicated talk show in 2009 with Dr. Phil and CBS. The show never aired, despite the involvement of well-known people and high expectations. The project collapsed due to the unstable economy. Jakes made another attempt in 2015, but most people would have stopped there. The T.D. Jakes Show debuted in 4 places this time before reaching 50 markets. It included self-help, celebrity interviews, and motivation. However, it was discontinued by March 2017. The ratings were poor. Nevertheless, it was taken up by Oprah Winfrey's network, which provided him with a fresh platform to spread his message. His family was developing into its own ministry during this time. He reared 5 kids with his wife, Sarita. Thomas Jr., Jamar, Jermaine, Sarah, and Cora. They are all engaged in ministry. It's not common. The majority of megachurch pastors are unable to say the same. Both Sarah and Cora rose to prominence as authors and preachers. The others are employed in media and operations. They weren't merely doing what their father said. In the same mission, they were constructing their own routes. Sarah's tale had a lot of impact. The day of her birth was July 17, 1988. She became a mother at the age of 14. Her future might have been over. Rather, it turned into her message. She started writing after her marriage ended and she was left to raise her son alone. People were moved by her candor. She wed Pastor Teray Roberts in 2014. These days, they co-pastor congregations in Denver and Los Angeles. Sarah and Teray were appointed the new Potter's House leaders in Dallas in April 2025. Her journey from teenage mother to megachurch leader is a tale of metamorphosis. Cora comes next. Her goal of having a son named Nehemiah began at an early age. Nearly 5 million women in the United States suffer from polycystic ovarian syndrome, which she was diagnosed with at the age of 22. She might never have children, according to doctors. It was heartbreaking. Despite going into depression, she persisted. To help other women like herself, she started a blog called Fertility Faith. She went on to become a preacher and is currently in charge of the children's ministry at the Dallas Potter's House. She still hopes to carry Nehemiah in her arms, and she adopted a daughter named Amore. She sought meaning in suffering. Unexpectedly, the worlds of finance and religion converged on April 27, 2023. Expectations and eyebrows were raised by the partnership between Wells Fargo and Pastor T.D. Jakes. They declared a huge 10-year collaboration that might invest up to $1 billion in America's most underserved communities. This was no temporary charitable commitment. The commitment was long-term. Loans totaling $1 billion. The goal of grants and investments is to improve the lives of people in areas that are typically overlooked by large institutions. Jakes carried his entire empire with him, not just his name. The T.D. Jakes Foundation, TDJ Enterprises, and T.D. Jakes Real Estate Ventures. Charlie Scharf, the CEO of Wells Fargo, also didn't hold back. This wasn't a one-time investment, he claimed. It was about creating genuine equity and long-term impact. They were doing more than simply writing checks together. The rules were being revised. Then, in 2024 and 2025, that billion-dollar pledge began to materialize. With support from Wells Fargo, the T.D. Jakes Foundation awarded $18 million in awards to 29 organizations nationwide. 16 organizations that prioritized career development, affordable housing, and financial literacy received the first $9 million. In April 2025, the additional $9 million was revealed, helping 13 additional organizations. This round focused on workforce preparedness and economic empowerment. Some of the grants were enormous. Paul Quinn College, Morehouse College, and Wiley University each received $1.5 million. They utilized it for mental health services, school upgrades, and new housing. $500,000 was given to the Lightship Foundation to support entrepreneurs. The same sum was given to the Power 52 Foundation for renewable energy education. Additionally, United Megacare raised $500,000 to combat food insecurity. These weren't merely gifts. Their investments in transformation were specifically targeted. The foundation's CEO, Kelly Cornish, put it best. This was more than merely carrying out the mission. It was a fearless protest for chance. However, Jakes' name was drawn into trouble by another type of article just as the media were complimenting him on his community service. A federal lawsuit involving Sean Diddy Combs made headlines around the beginning of 2024. Producer Rodney Lil Rod Jones filed the lawsuit, which included significant criminal charges against Combs for allegedly engaging in sexual harassment, drug use, and even sex trafficking. Jakes was never charged with any crimes. However, his name was mentioned. According to the lawsuit, Combs intended to utilize his relationship with Jakes to improve his public image following Cassie Ventura's rape and abuse case against him. Jakes' name was mentioned just once, yet it was sufficient. The media went crazy. Online rumors began to circulate. People were curious about the true link. Despite Jakes' lack of official involvement in the case, the remark alone created a commotion that persisted. Then, everything became much more chaotic. On a YouTube talk show in October 2024, Pastor Dwayne Youngblood, a convicted sexual offender, said that Jakes had attempted to sexually abuse him in the 1980s. According to him, that occurred when he was 18 or 19. Youngblood claims that Jakes tried to kiss him and gave him an unwanted hug. These assertions became viral on the internet. Additionally, Jakes received a letter from Youngblood via his attorney threatening to sue Jakes unless he paid $6 million. Jakes' legal team reacted quickly. They referred to it as extortion. They claimed that Youngblood was merely attempting to mend his own damaged reputation after being found guilty twice for crimes involving juveniles, in 2008 and 2014. They described the charges as spiteful, calculating, and untrue. Jakes retaliated a month later. He filed a defamation action in federal court on November 25, 2024. Others who might have assisted in spreading the misinformation were also targeted, in addition to Youngblood. Youngblood was charged in the filing with starting a concerted smear campaign. According to Jakes, the attacks had a negative impact on his physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. In actuality, a terrible incident occurred only one day prior to the complaint being filed. Bishop T.D. Jakes passed out in the middle of his sermon on November 24, 2024, while giving a live sermon at the Potter's House in Dallas. There were thousands in attendance. Online viewers numbered in the thousands. He began to shake as he got close to the finish of an hour-long message. The microphone fell from his hand. After sagging onto a stool, he keeled over. At first glance, it appeared to be fatigue. However, it wasn't. Jakes' heart attack had been severe. Live on video. The video became viral. Churchgoers hurried to assist. People called paramedics. Around the world, viewers observed the mayhem as it happened. Doctors then informed Jakes that he had nearly died. They claimed that he was within 5 minutes away from passing away. 5 minutes. He wouldn't have survived if he had reached the hospital any later. Blood flow to the right side of his heart was obstructed by the clot. He had lost half of his heart. During the sermon, adrenaline was the only thing that kept him going. His body failed him as soon as he sat down. He was preaching literally with only half of his heart engaged. He was forever altered by what transpired next. Jakes recounted a near-fatal encounter. He claimed to have felt as though he had left his body. He observed silence and white clouds. Tranquility. I was leaving, he said. Even though everything around him was in disarray, he felt totally at ease at that precise moment. He subsequently described the encounter as a spiritual awakening that helped him understand what was most important. He was forced to make a significant choice at that moment. Jakes formally announced it in front of his entire congregation on April 27, 2025. He declared that Sarah Jakes Roberts, his daughter, and her husband, Teray Roberts, would succeed him as senior pastors. Not any church was the Potter's House. With more than 30,000 members and millions more watching online, it was a major force in the world. A new era was now dawning. Jakes stated unequivocally that this was not retirement. There is no departure here. He described it as a rebirth. He wouldn't be completely leaving the pulpit. He would continue to lead, guide, and preach. However, Sarah and Teray would now be responsible for everyday leadership. He referred to it as an expansion rather than a departure. The changeover has been planned for years. Sarah and Teray relocated to Dallas from Los Angeles in 2022. They were assistant pastors by 2023, getting ready for this very occasion. Sarah had established her own movement already. Women change, with an emphasis on empowering women globally. The torch was now being passed. Megachurches rarely undergo this kind of change. Changes typically occur abruptly or following dispute. However, Jake has planned every aspect. It was clear. It was intentional. It was also really emotional.